Okay, the next item of business is a debate on motion 19512 in the name of Jackie Baillie on Scotland's maternity services. I'd invite members wishing to participate to press the request to speak buttons, and I invite Jackie Baillie to speak to and move the motion around 13 minutes. Ms Baillie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Now, the birth of a child is probably the most significant and special event for any mother. But in Scotland today, sadly, this is not always the case. Last week, the BBC Disclosure Programme reported on the tragic case of Jackie Hunter. Jackie died in childbirth from an amniotic fluid embolism. She had been given 8 times the recommended dose of the drug used to bring on labour. An NHS Tayside review found that higher doses of this drug increase the risk of an amniotic fluid embolism, and the incorrect dose, and I quote, must be considered as a major contributing factor to embolism and subsequent death. The panel also said that Jackie should have been informed of the medication error. Her grieving husband, Laurie, only found out after her death. Thankfully, deaths like Jackie's are rare, but for far too many women, childbirth can be a difficult experience. As Lindsay Hamilton, a maternity campaigner, has said when talking about her own experience of pre-eclampsia, you will see the headlines, you'll hear the statistics, but behind them are families, mothers and babies who are being let down throughout Scotland due to the lack of funding and investment in maternity services. Last month, I travelled to Wick in Caithness, where I heard stories of mothers forced to travel more than 100 miles to give birth, and this despite them having an amazing midwife-led maternity unit. I heard from the Caithness Health Action Team of a mother expecting twins who gave birth to her first child in Golspie and then continued the journey in 2 separate ambulances for the second twin to be born in Inverness. 9 in 10 women in Caithness give birth in hospital in Inverness, many of them induced. But that doesn't mean that they receive acceptable maternity care, despite the efforts of midwives, because Raigmore Hospital is bursting at the seams. Women at the start of labour are told to go home and wait. But as home is more than 100 miles away, they end up wandering the streets of Inverness, sometimes at night. I heard from Ashlyn, who arrived at the hospital to be induced, but was told that it was too busy and could she come back 2 hours later. This went on, and in the end, she waited over 12 hours to be induced. Raigmore Hospital's maternity unit was supposed to be upgraded, but the Scottish Government paused the funding just days after it was approved for development. Across Scotland, our rural and remote communities want young families to stay and to thrive. Instead, mothers are being forced to choose between healthcare and the place they call home. In Stranraer, the closure of local maternity services means expectant mothers are forced to travel 140 miles on a round trip to Dumfries for care. Claire Fleming, who is based near Stranraer, had children in 2012, 2015, 2019 and 2021. So she's seen the decline in maternity services throughout all her 4 pregnancies. Her first daughter was unfortunately stillborn, but she says she received outstanding support. In 2015, when she had her second child, she had a named midwife and only had to go to Dumfries for an appointment once. By 2021, when she had her 4th child and had extreme morning sickness, she had to make the 140-mile return journey for every single appointment, even appointments that were just 5 minutes long. The treatment in that instance was a drip in her arm. As Claire has asked many, many times, why couldn't they have done this closer to home? Women in remote and rural areas are right to call this out. So we know it can be better. Orkney, which I know is close to the Cabinet Secretary's heart, may be one of the most remote parts of Scotland, but its maternity unit has met UNICEF's gold standard. The unit is run by midwives who are supported by consultant obstetricians, but mums know that in an emergency they will be transported via helicopter to Aberdeen. There are around 180 births a year, but unlike the situation in Caithness, around 80% of them happen at the local maternity unit. So there is more that we can and should do in rural and remote areas. But the centralisation of services for mothers and babies is a nationwide issue. Families from Dundee to Lanarkshire have raised concerns about their specialist neonatal units being downgraded. And of course, everybody wants to see the sickest, most premature babies receive the highest standard of care. But while the 2017 Best Start report outlined the new model, it recommended up to 5 intensive neonatal units. But the Scottish Government has decided to deliver the minimum of 3. Meaning women could be separated from their babies or forced to travel hundreds of miles just to be with them. The Scottish Government must listen to local families and clinicians, work with them, not against them. The failures in maternity care, though, are not just about geography. Last week, an inspection report highlighted failures in Edinburgh's Royal Infirmary maternity unit, less than 4 miles down the road from where we are now. Expectant mums waiting as long as 29 hours to be induced, being sent to other hospitals because there simply wasn't enough room. Only 13% of the charts for patients' essential observations were fully completed. Women left alone in pain with no call system to ask for help. Delays in the escalation of care, and midwives in tears because of the pressure. Now, an unannounced inspection in Ninewells earlier this year painted a similarly damning picture. And across Scotland, at one of the most vulnerable times in their lives, women are being let down. In Glasgow, I heard from Julie Keegan. Julie, an NHS nurse who works in intensive care, noticed her newborn son Mason was hypothermic, listless and struggling to breathe. She rushed to Glasgow's Royal Children's Hospital, where Mason died 6 hours later. A significant adverse event review later found that his temperature had been recorded as 35 degrees when it was in fact so low it was unrecordable, while other records had not been completed, leading to failure to recognise just how sick he was. Julie believes that a toxic workplace culture played a part in Mason's death and backs a national investigation into maternity and neonatal services. She said, "It is a complete whitewash. They should be working with families, not fighting them, to ensure that this never happens again." Too often, the response to these tragedies is a veil of secrecy. But Mason's tragic death is not Julie's only experience of poor neonatal or maternity services. Earlier this year, expecting another child, she was given an appointment to be induced on a Monday. She ended up waiting 4 days because the maternity unit was short-staffed. Experiences like these are deeply distressing for mothers and the families involved. It's also distressing for staff, because across Scotland, NHS frontline staff are overworked, understaffed and burnt out. The Ninewells inspectors found a 33% shortfall in experienced midwives. The NHS Lothian report found that midwives were emotional and tearful while talking about the overwhelming feeling of helplessness, frustration and worry for not only patients, but staff safety. In 2024 alone, happy to take an intervention.
Finlay Carson.
Whilst patient safety is obviously paramount, would the member also accept that the reduction in midwives through poor workplace management has reduced the choice that women have, and women should have a choice where to give birth, not just base it on safety grounds?
Jackie Baillie.
I agree that actually understaffing is one of the key problems in some of the distressing cases I outlined, but also in being able to provide safe midwifery-led services locally. And I will come on to deal with that. Because in 2024 alone, research conducted by Labour found that there were 333,296 unfilled nurse and midwifery shifts. Behind those figures, though, are caring, experienced staff forced to make impossible choices due to the SNP's managed decline of our NHS. The Royal College of Midwives have repeatedly warned year after year about workplace shortages and the lack of opportunity for midwives to develop their skills. Indeed, last year, the member may remember, we saw the scandal of newly trained midwives facing unemployment. The Scottish Government has spent millions of pounds on their training, yet could not find the funding to give them jobs, at a time where we know that there are thousands of vacancies. So what we have? No workforce plan, skills going to rot, mothers not getting the support they need, and experienced frontline staff going off sick, retiring with burnout. Midwives and other frontline staff are trying their best, but they are being set up to fail. So I welcome the Scottish Government's decisions to set up a task force to take immediate action. But it is not by itself enough. Government is littered with task forces, with recommendations that have not been implemented. We need a national investigation, not in place of the task force, but alongside it, starting now. That's what the families want. That's what this Parliament should deliver. We need maternity services that wrap their arms around women and babies, rather than expecting them to wait to be induced for days and days on end, because it's simply more convenient to do it that way. We need transparency, not secrecy. We need the duty of candour to be effective, rather than words on a page. We need more than 3 specialist neonatal services to cover the diverse geography of Scotland. We need to learn from the best international practice to deliver the very highest standards of remote and rural care. We need a proper workforce plan that enshrines our investment in the next generation of midwives, and that will pay off so that maternity units are properly staffed. And we need to ensure that we hold those at the top accountable while fostering a workplace culture where staff feel supported and there is a willingness and transparency and openness to learn from mistakes. Now, I have to say the UK Labour Government delivered record funding for Scotland's public services, an extra £5.2 billion to spend this year alone. A fraction of that would have made a difference to maternity services. This is about investing in the next generation. It is about investing in women's health. It's about investing in our rural communities and investing in Scotland's future. Presiding Officer, today's MSPs of all parties have a chance to listen to the mums, to the dads, to the doctors, to the experts, and agree to a national investigation into these crucial services so that mothers and babies can be safe and get the treatment that they need. And I'm glad that a baby is having the last word.
Unfortunately, the baby can't move the motion, Ms Bailey, so I'd be grateful if you could.
I take pleasure in moving the motion.
Thank you very much indeed. I now call on Neil Gray to speak to and move the Amendment 19512.3. Cabinet Secretary, around 9 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I move the amendment in my name, and I would like to thank Jackie Bailey for raising the motion for this debate. And I agree with a substantial amount of what she has put on the record today. I provided a statement in Parliament last week in response to the recent concerning reports on maternity services in Scotland. I am aware that there are families impacted by NHS failures and that were covered by the BBC Disclosure documentary here today. I've just met one of them, but I put on record once again at the outset my deepest condolences to those that are here, and my thanks to them for their bravery in speaking up about their personal experiences. I know how difficult that will have been, but it helps to ensure that we can learn and make improvements. So I'm genuinely very grateful to them for that, and I would be happy to meet with them if that is possible. I'll take Sarah Boyack and then Sanders Kilhanney.
Sarah Boyack.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Would you agree that the experience of women who miscarry also needs to be looked at? Because one of my constituents had to wait while 2 parts of the NHS argued over who should see her, as her pregnancy was at the 12-week point, too late for early pregnancy unit, too late for early pregnancy, but too early for the triage unit. And she then had to return several times for checks on her pregnancy hormone levels, which weren't reducing. And that was in an area alongside pregnant women while she had miscarried her baby. So would the Cabinet Secretary take action now to make sure that our constituents in Lothian get the change urgently needed?
I absolutely agree with Sarah Boyack. I expect that to be part of both the improvements that need to come through from his review, but also can be considered as part of the task force that Ms Minto is chairing. I take Sanders Gohan.
Sanders Gohan.
I'd like to thank the Cabinet Secretary for taking an intervention and declaration of interest in a practising NHS GP. Cabinet Secretary, I wonder what your view is on repeated surveys showing obstetrics and gynaecology have the highest level of bullying of any specialty, and given culture comes from the top, is it any wonder that there's a culture of secrecy when significant errors happen, and it takes brave women to stand up and speak to shine a light on the problems?
All through the chair.
Presiding officer, I made absolutely clear in response to questions from Dr Gahani's colleague, Mr Kerr, last week about the very clear expectation I have for the culture within our NHS, reinforced by what we found in the report from Healthcare Improvement Scotland regards NHS Lothian. I've made that absolutely clear. I've put that on the record. I won't tolerate poor culture, and that has been made clear to NHS Board Chief Executives. I know that members... I will need to make some progress. I hope you'll forgive me. I will see if I can come to Mr Kerr later. I know that members of this Parliament will agree that the safety of well-being of mothers, babies and staff must be our priority. I also want to reassure pregnant women and their families that our maternity and neonatal services are safe, though I will come to where that has not been the case. Women in Scotland have the right to choose where to give birth, and those who choose to give birth in our hospitals can be assured that they are the safest possible place to give birth, with access to the best possible care. Wherever women choose to give birth, whether in an obstetric-led unit, a midwifery-led unit or at home, they can and should expect the highest quality of care tailored to their needs. That is why I accept the initial part of Ms Bailey's motion, and indeed why I am sympathetic to the majority of Mr Gilhani's amendment. As I said in my statement last week, I share concerns about the Healthcare Improvement Scotland's report into maternity services in Lothian and those raised by the BBC Disclosure documentary. The findings are completely unacceptable, and it is right that this Parliament takes a firm position that improvements must be made urgently, which I welcome the opportunity for today. I also recognise, not least following the conversation I have just had with Laurie Quaite and Willie Rennie, for which I am very grateful to them both for taking place this afternoon, that trust has been broken between families who have been let down and the NHS. I'm determined to ensure that families have the opportunity to feed into the improvements we want to see and have the opportunity to share their experiences candidly. I am therefore exploring whether this can be done through his inspection process, and I'll also be asking the Scottish Patient Safety Commissioner for her views on how we do this most effectively when I meet with her next week. I will not repeat all of the points that I set out. I'll try and come back. I want to make progress, but I do also want to ensure that colleagues have the opportunity to have their say as well. I will not repeat all of the points I set out in my statement last week, but I want to be clear from the outset today that the Government remains absolutely open and willing to do everything necessary to improve the services women and babies receive across Scotland. I've been very clear with NHS Lothian of the urgent improvements I expect to see before the end of this year, and the First Minister reiterated the importance of boards responding timorously to any concerns raised about maternity services when we met with NHS Chief Executives last week. Members will also be aware that I intend to convene a meeting with NHS Lothian's Chief Executive and MSPs from across this chamber so that they can ask any questions that they may have directly. I hope that we can use today's debate to agree the need for members of all parties, government included, to work collaboratively together to bring about the improvements we all want to see. The Government's amendment in my name is intended to set out clearly that we are open to a wider national review of maternity services. However, we do already have a series of local inspections of every maternity unit in Scotland already underway. I think it is right that those inspections should continue at pace so that we can make immediate improvements rather than initiating a review in place of these, which would be potentially lengthy and require us to wait for the findings to identify where changes can be made. Of course I will.
Jackie Bailey.
I'm grateful to the Cabinet Secretary. A national investigation is not in place of the work that is going on. It's alongside, and it's a recognition that this is an issue that doesn't just affect one hospital, one maternity service, but is a problem Scotland-wide.
Cabinet Secretary.
So I recognise the point that Jackie Bailey makes. I believe that his inspection regime allows us to get into greater detail at local levels and allows us then to consider those reports through the task force. And should that task force recommend that national review, I would be more than happy to accede to that request. I think that the action that they are taking is robust. It ensures that immediate live response to those concerns can be responded to, and we can see the improvement as the challenges are unearthed through Healthcare Improvement Scotland. I will give way.
Briefly, Willie Rennie.
I understand the point the Cabinet Secretary is making, that he wants immediate action, but in his statement last week he set out a series of investigations of his reports over many years that have already been conducted. Yet we still had that disclosure documentary. We still had that devastating impact. So surely he must recognise the current system of investigation is just not enough on its own.
Cabinet Secretary.
I disagree, because the findings, the Healthcare Improvement Scotland inspections have only begun this year. To uncover the challenges that we have seen in Tayside and indeed in Lothian, and they have come as a result of the neonatal investigations that took place previously, for which the government accepted the fact that there was the need for that acute maternity inspection process, and that's where his is currently embarked on. And we expect there to be significant additional inspections taking place before March, I believe 8, which will give us a good coverage across the entire country to give us a full picture of the situation. So I very much understand the situation that Jackie Bailey and indeed Willie Rennie are outlining. I think his report regime gives us just that. I give way to Pam Duncan.
Pam Duncan-Glancy.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for taking the intervention. My colleague Marie Tidbull MP has started a campaign looking at the experience of disabled people during maternity on the back of the London School of Hygiene's Tropical Medicine report, finding that disabled women are 44% more likely to have a stillbirth than non-disabled women. Could the Cabinet Secretary confirm that in any investigation going forward it will be inclusive of all women, including disabled women?
Cabinet Secretary.
It absolutely has to be, of course. There's no equivocation on that. The new Scottish Maternity and Neonatal Task Force, which I announced last week, will review the findings of his inspections. 2 of these inspections have already taken place in Tayside and Lothian and completed and reported, and his have committed to performing 8 NHS acute maternity inspections by March 2026. Following the review of the findings and recommendations of these inspections, if the Task Force recommendations a wider national review, I confirm to Parliament today that the Government will take this forward, giving full consideration to staff and patient welfare. I hope this makes clear to members that the Government is not shutting down the prospect of a review, but that a process is already underway should conclude in that first instance. In relation... I don't know how much time I've got left, Presiding Officer.
We've used up all of the time. I'm expecting to extend the debate a little, given the nature of the discussions. But, I mean, as I say, we're over time.
Mr Kerr can be pithy.
Stephen Kerr, briefly.
Very pithy. Despite what he's saying, I can't see how, without a national inquiry, you get to the issues of culture that he spoke so strongly about last week. I mean, it's one thing to make pronouncements, it's another thing to bring change about. Without a national inquiry and a set of recommendations to do just that, how do we proceed?
Cabinet Secretary.
Said that should his inspections that we are getting before March and the task force recommend that course, then of course that's what I will do. I believe that culture has been exposed in his inspections. We saw that was central to the criticism of the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh report, for which I will not tolerate. And I expect to see cultural improvements, and we are seeing management improvements and changes as a result. So that is why I have confidence in the situation being developed through his. If that is changes in any way, of course, that is something that I am open to. In relation to Mr Rennie's amendment, as I said in my statement last week, I expect the task force to look at rural maternity services as one of its first areas of focus. Members will be aware that NHS Highland instigated a review of services in Caithness in 2016 following the death of a full-term baby in Caithness General Health Hospital. NHS Highland's review incorporated the findings from 2 external reviews and recommended the move to the current model of maternity care operating in Caithness. That being said, I am sympathetic to the concerns being been raised in the Liberal Democrat amendment, and indeed from my colleagues Marie Todd and Emma Roddick that have raised. And I'll need to conclude, my apologies to Mr Cole-Hamilton. Indeed, my colleagues Marie Todd and Emma Roddick have raised their own concerns about the views of women in Caithness. That's why the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health met with local campaigners in the summer. I'm happy to confirm that I will ask the task force to review specifically the issues in Caithness and indeed other rural communities in Stranraer and others, and that is why the Government will support the amendment by Will there any today. We recognise that we must maintain focus on timely and continuous improvement to ensure that mothers and their babies can receive the best possible care they can, which is why in Scotland we have chosen to act now rather than wait on a lengthy review process. And so, turning back to my own amendment, Healthcare Improvement Scotland took the decision to commence inspections of maternity services in Scotland following recommendations from the neonatal mortality review. This decision was fully supported by the Government. Following Tayside and Lothian's inspections, 3 further inspections have now taken place and the reports will be published in due course. Healthcare Improvement Scotland has confirmed that it will complete its inspection programme of the remaining 10 obstetric maternity units from April 2026. And once all 18 acute obstetric maternity inspections are complete, Healthcare Improvement Scotland will carry out a thematic assessment and analysis and publish an overview report. This will support national learning and build on our continuous improvement over the coming months. This programme of independent, unannounced inspections is working exactly as it was intended. The inspections have identified where improvements are needed and are holding services and boards to account. The inspections are intelligence-led and identify issues on the ground to drive improvements in real time. Healthcare Improvement Scotland works with each board to address the requirements and recommendations, providing improvement support and robust follow-up findings. This process may include engagement with the board, the offer of coaching and mentoring, and the support with quality improvement tools and resources. Approximately 18 weeks after the publication of the inspection report, the board is expected to submit a progress report to Healthcare Improvement Scotland, and at that point, Healthcare Improvement Scotland will determine whether any further follow-up action is required. Healthcare Improvement Scotland will also use the emerging themes from their findings in their inspections to identify and implement national improvements. Furthermore, we have commissioned HIS to develop national standards for maternity care. The standards are currently open for public consultation, closing on Friday. Those standards will publish early in 2026. Presiding Officer, as I draw my remarks to conclusion, I wish to note the comments from Jackie Lambert, the Director of the RCM in Scotland last week in response to the BBC Disclosure Programme, who said that many of the solutions that are in the recommendations of the Ministerial Nursing and Midwifery Task Force. I want to assure members that the programme of implementation of these recommendations is underway. And there is a huge amount to do to implement the full range of actions of improvement and for the full value of changes to take account throughout this process. Presiding Officer, to conclude, it is right that, as I've outlined today, both and last week, that I want to assure Parliament that this Government, myself, are committed to driving forward improvements across maternity services. I am keen to work collaboratively with colleagues across this chamber to do just that, to bring about the improvements, and I will remain open and willing to listen to the views of members on what more can be done.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. As I alerted the Chamber, we have exhausted all time and gone beyond that in terms of the time we had available. I'm conscious of the business we have later on this afternoon and this evening, and so while I've been able to give the Cabinet Secretary some time back for the many interventions he has taken, it will be difficult to sustain that through the remainder of this debate unless we are to run seriously over time, and I am keen to avoid that if at all possible. I now call Standish Gulhani to speak to and move Amendment 19512.2 up to 7 minutes. Dr Gulhani.
This debate focuses on one of the most sensitive and vital areas of healthcare, the safety of giving birth and the well-being of mothers and babies. The recent inspection report and harrowing BBC expose into maternity services are deeply troubling. They show staff shortages, exhausted clinicians, and mothers who do not feel safe or heard. And I think it is clear across this chamber from the reactions that we are seeing that we all agree that the current situation is unacceptable. For any government, that should be a wake-up call. The trouble is, this SNP government is asleep at the wheel and has been for years. We fully agree that there must be a national investigation into the design and delivery of maternity services and neonatal services. The Royal College of Midwives has called for urgent action after the recent BBC investigation laid bare serious failings. These are not isolated incidents either. They are symptoms of a system that's under pressure and a tired government that has lost control and run out of ideas. When clinicians sound the alarm, government must listen. Instead, this SNP administration ploughs on with controversial plans to downgrade maternity hospitals against the clear wishes of local communities and staff. Across Scotland, families and campaigners are rightly concerned. In Wishaw, an award-winning neonatal unit is facing downgrading. In Dundee, more than 17,000 people have signed a petition to save Ninewells. In Kirkcaldy and Ayrshire, staff and patients share the same fears that vital local services will be stripped away. Centralisation on this scale forces families in rural areas to travel hundreds of miles at the most frightening time of their lives. It separates mothers from newborns and tears parents away from their support networks. That is not progress, it's abdication of responsibility. Deputy Presiding Officer, we are told this change is based on strong clinical advice, but I fear this centralisation is being driven by workforce failure and not clinical excellence. The SNP government cannot staff its existing services, and that's why units are being downgraded, not because clinicians want it, but because they are being forced to accept it. Let's be honest, SNP workforce planning is abysmal. We train talented midwives here in Scotland, only for many to be unable to find jobs. Some are crossing the border to work in England because posts are not available. Morale among staff is at breaking point, and now, instead of fixing the workforce crisis, ministers are redesigning a service around their own failure to recruit and retain. This is not reform, it's retreat and it's surrender. That is why the Scottish Conservatives are calling on the government to pause all downgrades of maternity and neonatal services until a full independent task force has reported its recommendations and they are known to this Parliament. No irreversible decisions should be made until we understand the consequences for safety, workforce and access. Because once a local neonatal unit is losing its intensive care status, it almost never comes back. Centralisation may look tidy on a ministerial briefing paper, but it's mothers, babies and exhausted NHS staff who will live with the consequences. Even the SNP's own former Health Secretary, Jean Freeman, has now admitted that current crisis in the Scottish NHS has results of failures of successive SNP governments, including her own. She said that politicians focus on what needs to be done to remain in power, rather than what needs to be done to fix the NHS. Those words are not ours, they're hers, and I will.
Claire Adamson.
Thank the member for giving way. The Best Start report on which the plans for neonatal services across the country is based was clinician-led. It was done in consultation and is supported by the Bliss charity. Would you recognise that this is an endorsement?
Sanders Colhani.
Wow. If we don't have enough staff to do the current resources that we have, if we have a toxic culture, if we are seeing a terrible report and a BBC expose, that is the reason that they are forced to accept this. If we had enough staff, I do not think that would be the case. Now, they confirm that what clinicians have been saying for years, that Scottish Government's short-term political approach has left our health service without the long-term strategy it desperately needs. And this neglect is not confined to maternity care. Across Scotland, 1 in 6 people are now on a waiting list. GPs have worsened year after year, with SNP's failure to deliver on promises made in the GP contract. Staff are leaving faster than they can be replaced. The government boasts about record budgets, yet services are being cut, centralised or rationed. The public sees through it. They see a government that cannot match its rhetoric with results. The Scottish Conservatives believe every woman should have the choice to give birth where she feels safest, at home, in a community midwife unit, or in a properly supported local hospital. We believe in care that is personal, safe and as close to home as possible. And we believe in listening to the professionals, the midwives, neonatal nurses and obstetricians whose experience should shape services, not to be overridden by civil servants and political spin. That means fixing workforce planning, ensuring every graduate we train has a post in Scotland and supporting staff with the training and flexibility that they need. It means valuing local hospitals, not undermining them, and it means designing services for patients and not promoting election stunts such as the GP walk-in centres, as proven by the First Minister in writing and the Cabinet Secretary for Health in the question session earlier, unable to answer basic questions about the walk-in centres. The Cabinet Secretary says the work's taken place on this, so why not tell us the basic information? Now, these stunts are not real solutions to the serious problems we face, Presiding Officer. This debate is not about ideology, it's about humanity. It's about mothers who deserve reassurance, not risk. It's about clinicians who want to deliver safe care, but are stretched beyond their limits. It's about the babies whose first moment should not be defined by postcode or political mismanagement. The Labour motion before us is sensible and proportionate. It calls for an investigation that really should already have been underway. So tonight we will support it. Our amendment is also sensible and proportionate, not least because of the dire nature of the report and the BBC disclosure programme. This gives Parliament time to pause and think. And if this government, I wish I could, but I have no time left. If the government doesn't heed our advice, the Cabinet Secretary will be responsible for any future risk to mother and babies. And with that, I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you, Dr Gulhani. I now call Willie Rennie to speak to move Amendment 19512.1 up to 6 minutes. Mr Rennie.
I think it is important to begin by recognising the vast majority of births in Scottish hospitals are done so successfully, and the mothers and the children leave those hospitals safely. It's important to say that at the beginning. And we should also thank the thousands of staff who work on those units across the country, because they do a spectacular job in really difficult circumstances. What we're talking about here is what we do when things go wrong, and things have gone wrong in far too many occasions. Olivia was stillborn in Ninewells Hospital 5 years ago plus. 24 hours later, her mother Jackie was gone as well. You'll have witnessed the testimony from her husband Laurie, who's in the gallery today, who actually uncharacteristically broke down in that documentary. It's quite a rare breakdown for Laurie, because he is an astonishing champion. He's somebody who has fought almost every single day since then to not just get answers for him and his family who are here today, but families across the country as well, and the good staff that work in hospitals that deserve support. He's been determined ever since that day in May 2020. And he did so today with the Cabinet Secretary when we met. And I think the Cabinet Secretary will agree he didn't hold back. He was very straight about the fact that we do want a national investigation and the reasons why, and the number of failings that they have identified through the process. So this particular case with Jackie was about the issues around about the drug overdose that was administered, which led, we believe, to an amniotic fluid embolism at its heart. So there's a debate about that. But there are wider issues that are really significant that I think from the event we did earlier on today with other families was quite clear there was themes that developed, and from different health boards in different parts of the country that were very, very clear. The duty of candour, I think, is at the centre of this, and I know Stephen Kerr has done a lot of work in this area, where in this particular case, there wasn't proper recording of the overdose, but yet there was no penalty at the end of the process for that failure to record adequately the overdose. So we have got a situation where people, perhaps incentivised not to declare because of the fear of admitting they've got something wrong, but equally, when they don't record, there is no consequences for them for failing to do so. Yes, I'll take an intervention.
Thank you. I wonder if Mr Rennie would also agree that when we have a position, as I have been told in multiple instances, of only 2 midwives being on when there should be 7, they simply don't have the time to do the job that they really want to do.
Rennie.
And I think that is true with the 70 midwives that were brought into NHS Lothian, when they've got a complement of, 450 across NHS Lothian. That's a massive shortfall in the number of staff. So he's right. But we shouldn't just let the issues of resources and staff hide the fact that there are some issues of culture at the centre of this that we really need to dig into, because I think even if we had the fullest complement of staff, we might still have issues around about the culture of candour, of recording, and of the penalty or the consequences of failing to record. Because that failure of candour led to the failure to allow Jackie, in this particular case, to have agency over our own life and over our own decisions. And that's the second point that I think that a national investigation that I think should happen should consider as well. The failure to follow standards and guidelines, in this particular case because they were considered too long to read. Why on earth would that never be a barrier? If they're too long to read, we should have guidelines that are succinct and to the point and that can be applied to. The other more difficult thing, and this is really difficult for us because we're talking about NHS staff who we admire greatly, but the cover that some professionals provide for other professionals in time of stress and investigation. And I do worry sometimes that there is considered the greater good is that that individual remains in their post. But actually, we do need to have a situation where everybody is open when there's an investigation and the NHS professionals don't feel they need to cover for each other. Now, I don't know how often this happens. I'm sorry, I'm really short for time. I don't know how often this happens. But if it happens in the number of cases that I hear about, it's far too many. Now, the number of stillbirths in Scotland has dropped quite significantly, but it's plateaued in the last few years. We've not made further progress on the reduction. And we've also not got a target like they've got in England. And I think we should be aiming to have that kind of target. So my final point is to the Minister. And I know I can understand the pragmatic way that he's going about this, that he believes the task force is the best way to proceed with this. But I think the issues are bigger. And we need somebody with authority from outside the system, crudely, to rattle the cage and to make the changes that are necessary. And I think a task force with representatives from inside the current system, I do not think will be enough to address all these issues that I've highlighted this afternoon. Because the one thing for sure is that for the families that are in the gallery today, we need to do everything that we possibly can to change all of that so we can reduce the possibility of it ever happening again. Thank you.
Could you move the amendment, please? Mr Rennie, could you move the amendment?
I'll move the amendment in mind.
Thank you very much. And I call Patrick Harvey up to 6 minutes. Mr Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think every member who has spoken so far has talked about the profound impact on individuals and on families who've been failed by the system. And I think we can all recognise the seriousness of that. And I also want to recognise Willie Rennie's opening remarks as he started to speak, talking about the recognition that we owe to the incredible dedication and hard work of the staff who are doing their best, as well as the need for reassurance. And Willie Rennie spoke about this, the reassurance that in the large majority of cases, services are safe and are being provided to a standard that people can have confidence in. And I think we all have a responsibility not to exacerbate fears, but to respond legitimately to failings where they've happened. Because these issues are so profound, I do think they go beyond party politics, and I welcome Jackie Bailey's motion and the tone with which she prevented it. She didn't give in to the temptation to make repeated comments about this SNP government or such a thing as SNP workforce planning. I'm not sure what that even means, but I think the motion was presented in a way that did reflect that this issue goes beyond party politics. I'm afraid I'm going to make some progress. That this issue goes beyond party politics and should do. Because what we've seen and been informed about over the recent period goes beyond what's just been in one documentary. Some of the issues that we've heard about in recent weeks go back years before this. A whistleblower investigation in 2024, which informed the recent BBC documentary, talked about mothers and newborn babies coming to harm because of staff shortages at a toxic culture at Edinburgh's maternity unit. The whistleblowing report had found that patient safety was being compromised by a series of factors, including staff shortages leading to delays. It said there is no dispute that there have been safety concerns, near misses and actual adverse outcomes for women and babies. And it talked about a toxic working environment as well. We've also, going back before then, seen from the RCM a survey of members across Scotland exposing the scale of challenges that professionals are facing every day. Too few staff, a poor skill mix, inadequate equipment, substandard environments and no time to learn and develop. And in 2023, the RCM's State of Maternity Services report detailed how rising intervention rates, increasing complexity and growing policy and regulatory demands required a larger, more skilled workforce. So many of these issues go back some significant time. These are not news to those who've been working in the system for a long time. The recent inspection reports have highlighted continued issues with staff shortages, inconsistent training and variation in quality between regions. So all of this leads us to the question in the Labour motion: does this require a national investigation in addition to the steps that were announced last week? I do want to welcome the steps that were announced by the Cabinet Secretary last week, the task force, and I do think that we should recognise the importance of the clinical and expert advice and expertise that's being brought into that, as well as the escalation of the support and intervention framework in Lothian. These must be seen as first steps. These must be seen as first steps. We're then asked whether a national investigation needs to proceed alongside that, or be part of its work, or be framed by it. And I was interested in one of the points that Stephen Kerr made. He talked about the emphasis of an investigation into culture. That is different from, both legitimate, but very different from an investigation into the design and delivery of services, both maternity and neonatal services, as the Labour motion suggests. So I think there are different, equally valid issues being raised here. The Cabinet Secretary said, I think I'm quoting correctly, that he's more than happy that a national investigation would take place if the scope and its nature was determined and informed by experts. If I have time for one intervention, I think.
Sue Webber, briefly.
Thank you for accepting that intervention, Mr Harvey. As a Lothian MSP, and I know your colleague Lorna Slater, we've received a briefing in September this year that spoke of training that was provided to NHS Lothian staff on culture in May 2025. Yet in June, when this HIS inspection took place, we heard that nothing had changed. How can we as elected members have any confidence that we are not being held for fools by some of these?
Always through the chair. Patrick Harvey.
Thank you. I did speak briefly about the Lothian situation. I've now moved on to discussing this call for a national investigation. What I need to hear from the Scottish Government, and what I think they need to be very clear about if they're asking the Chamber to vote for their amendment, is what is their intention in framing a national investigation. Yes, there's a legitimate question about its scope, about whether it covers maternity as well as neonatal services or focuses on maternity services. There are questions about how the clinical advice that is being sought by government forms the decision about how a national investigation would take place. But that fundamentally is what I want to hear from the government, including from the Minister who will chair the task force. In chairing that task force, in taking forward that discussion, will her role be to define how that national investigation takes place, or will she be asking about whether it should take place? I need to hear in the closing speeches a very clear steer that the government will be asking how this national investigation will take place, not whether.
Thank you. We now move to the open debate. I call first Davy Russell, to be followed by Claire Haughey. Up to 6 minutes. Mr Russell.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. As we learned from the recent BBC disclosure documentary, maternity and neonatal services in Scotland are lacking sufficient resources to meet the needs of families. However, I must say that I often hear from constituents that once they are in the care of the NHS, they are blown away by the professionalism and dedication and passion shown by the staff. But the disclosure documentary highlighted cases where women couldn't access that special care they needed. Whether it's women needing to give birth in a 4-person wardroom, or the utterly heartbreaking stories of women and babies dying because, in part, nursing and midwifery staff are not present in sufficient numbers, especially at night and at weekends. Allow me not to be the first to tell the Scottish Government that, like Time and Tide, babies wait for no man and don't appear just during working hours. All of this leads to the planned downgrade of Wish's award-winning neonatal unit as part of the reorganisation of 9 specialist neonatal and maternity units to be replaced by 3 specialist units in Aberdeen, Edinburgh and Glasgow. Not to belittle the need for a specialist neonatal unit in Aberdeen, as there is a need for something in the North East and the Highlands and Islands, but recent data showed that Wisha Neonatal had the 3rd highest number of neonatal admissions, ahead of Aberdeen, and the 2nd highest number of babies with cumulative days spent on a respirator.
I thank David Russell for giving way. I want to provide reassurance to David Russell's constituents, to my constituents and others across the country, that the design of these services has been recommended under clinical advice. This has been absolutely clear, and they have also been supported by Bliss, which is a UK-wide recognised charity for these matters. It is critically important that we are clear that this is about saving babies' lives, the sickest of babies and those that require the greatest intervention, and that is why we're going through this process.
David Russell, I can give you the time back for the intervention.
Given that the recommendation from the Best Start report called for between 3 and 5 units, it's a disgrace that the Scottish Government has chosen this way forward and opted for 3. It could have included Wisha to serve the families in the South West, and along with 9 wells in Dundee, which would have served Fife and Perthshire. Right, with the review probably after a period of time to evaluate the situation, which would have been a common-sense approach rather than the severe downgrading 9 to 3. This is irresponsible and cavalier an approach in gambling with babies' lives. The other problem, of course, with the metrics used in determining where and how many specialist neonatal units are needed in counting the number of babies born before 27 weeks. Most babies born prior to 27 weeks come from emergency situations where it's often unsafe to move a mum and baby, and they need to remain in whatever hospital they are already at. Obviously, this can skew the results towards city centres, but this ignores the difficulty in moving fragile newborns and is going to result in more of what we have seen in the disclosure documentary. It is shocking that the Scottish Government chose to go with the 3 units instead of even a minimum of 5, which would have at least kept it within the recommendations of the report. I will add that we must consider the inevitable under-resourcing within these specialist neonatal units, because it has happened everywhere else in NHS Scotland, and it is inevitable that my constituencies and many others are going to need to be transferred to Aberdeen, because that's where the spare capacity will be, and that's 150 miles of a journey and at least 3 hours away for mum and baby, or a 300-mile round trip for the other family members. And despite 80% of the population living within or adjacent to the Central Belt, the meagre ration of £8.50 per person per day for food and travel is not going to cut it, and neither is the contribution towards reasonable accommodation to stay within the vicinity of the NICU for weeks.
Mr Russell, I would advise you will need to be winding up fairly soon. David Russell, I would suggest you haven't got time to take an intervention.
Sorry, I haven't got time. Right. The SNP government are asking parents to cover the costs above this level. For everyone's benefit, an online petition against the closure of Wishow's specialist neonatal unit currently stands at over 26,000 signatures. On their behalf, I ask the Scottish Government to re-examine and fully review this ill-judged and dangerous decision.
Thank you, Mr Russell. I now call Claire Hawkey to be followed by Megan Gallagher. Up to 6 minutes. Ms Hawkey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I put on record my entry in the Members' Register of Interests. I hold a bank nurse contract with NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. I'm sure many of us were deeply moved by the experiences shared on the recent BBC Disclosure programme on maternity and neonatal services. The families who have chosen to share their stories in recent weeks have shown almost unimaginable courage and resilience. The loss of a baby or a child is a pain beyond any of your worst fears. When the Health Secretary announced to Parliament last week after the publication of the report into acute maternity services at the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh and the disclosure documentary, he shared his own family's experience and his own deep personal gratitude to the maternity staff for their care. Presiding Officer, I know that this gratitude will be shared by many of us in this chamber today, and that this is an incredibly emotive and sensitive subject and will have a deeply personal resonance for most members, whether in relation to themselves, family or their loved ones. Before my election to Parliament, I specialised in perinatal mental health for around 15 years. So I'm only too aware that the period around birth can be the most exciting times in a family's life, but sometimes can be the most challenging, all the more so when events do not go to plan. When this happens, it is our hard-working maternity care midwives, nurses, support staff, doctors and clinicians who do an incredible job in offering families compassionate and supportive care. In my 30-plus years of clinical practice, we've seen significant progress in many areas in reducing infant mortality, neonatal deaths and stillbirths, which reached their lowest level in 2024. And in September, NHS Lanarkshire, which provides care to many of my constituents, won the Health Services Journal's Award for Maternity and Midwifery Services Initiative of the Year for their innovation, expertise and unwavering commitment to patient safety. This was following the launch of their holistic antenatal care pathway to provide women with optimal care and evidence-based interventions to reverse an increasing rate of stillbirth, which the board had noted during the pandemic. And I'll give way to Monica Lennon.
Monica Lennon, briefly.
I'm grateful to Claire Hawkey and also to listen to her own expertise. I think it's because the unit at Wishaw, the NICU, which is award-winning, and because of the excellent care by the staff and that close bond with families who have to keep going back for ongoing care, does she recognise that's why it is so frightening for families and those who put the life of their babies in the hands of that hospital and wouldn't have their babies without it? Does she understand why the calls for the review or the pause are going louder and louder, and we need to do what we can to try and save that unit?
Claire Hawkey.
Thank you, and I thank Monica Lennon for her intervention. I'm going to come on to that very point at the end of my speech. Any death or injury in maternity and neonatal services is too many and an absolute tragedy, and must of course be followed by a period of reflection and learning. And the SNP Scottish Government is committed to learning from every case to improve, strengthen care and safety and support families. And that's why the HIS inspection reports are being undertaken and will be reviewed by Scotland's new Maternity and Neonatal Task Force. And yes, as the Health Secretary acknowledged last week, some may make difficult reading for health boards in the Government. And if the new task force recommends it, the Government absolutely agrees that a national investigation into service design and delivery should take place. Presiding Officer, there are around 56,000 Scots who have the word Rutherglen on their birth certificates, and from 1979 until 1998, Rutherglen Maternity Hospital operated as a standalone maternity hospital on Stonelaw Road in my constituency. There are many people in Rutherglen and Cambuslang, Halfway, Blantyre and East Kilbride who have fond memories of welcoming a new addition to their families in Rutherglen Maternity. I worked there myself during my nurse training, and my oldest son was born in the hospital. The care mothers and babies received there is still viewed with fondness and high regard by many, and there were genuinely and sincerely held strong feelings upon the news of its closure. Unfortunately, of course, things did not always go to plan, and over the years I've heard many stories of times when, for example, an emergent issue such as a cardiovascular or a neurological incident meant a mother or infant had to be rushed to another hospital in Glasgow to access more specialist care, sometimes just in time to save their life. The decision to eventually close Rutherglen Maternity, instigated under a Tory administration and completed by a Labour administration, ultimately hinged on its standalone status. And the view of the clinical experts at the time that there were difficulties or complications, acute hospitals and a full range of further specialist support should be available on the site. And that when highly complex and specialist neonatal surgery or complex neonatal paediatric care were required, it was the board's view that there were clear safety benefits of co-location with main centres of excellence. Again, I fully appreciate that this is a highly emotive topic for many families today, as it was 27 years ago, but it's extremely disappointing to see that the same points against this very clear and direct argument have been recently rehashed by some opposition politicians, and misinformation has been circulated regarding Scotland's neonatal service model today. As the Health Secretary made crystal clear in Parliament last week, no neonatal units are closing, and where care is being consolidated, it is for the very smallest and sickest babies within 3 specialist units, and it is so that these babies have the absolute best chance of survival. The new model of neonatal intensive care was recommended by the Best Start 2017 report following robust clinical evidence. Clinical evidence this government would be heavily criticised for if it did not follow on the safest and best possible model for the sickest babies. Presiding Officer, I'm aware I need to close. We must together reaffirm our shared and utmost priority that the safety and well-being of mothers and babies is paramount.
Thank you. And I call Megan Gallagher to be followed by Claire Adamson. Up to 6 minutes, Ms Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Every mother deserves to give birth feeling safe, supported and close to home. And I think Willie Rennie made a pertinent point in his opening remarks. We're talking about when things go wrong, not the vast majority of births that are successful, go well, and both mother, baby and family can go home safely. But that's the problem, because too many women in Scotland face the opposite of that. Long journeys, understaffed wards, unit downgrades and a system that is stretched beyond limits. The state of Scotland's maternity and neonatal services is not the result of a sudden crisis or an increase in the number of births, but years of managed decline. Despite clear evidence, repeated warnings, localised campaigns and countless assurances from ministers, the Scottish Government has failed to address the serious inequalities and safety issues facing new parents in both urban and rural settings. The time for excuses has long passed. The Best Start plan set out an ambition to redesign maternity and neonatal services across Scotland. Its aim was to reduce separation of mothers and babies, to provide care closer to home and to support parental presence and involvement in neonatal care. The principles of these goals, I think, is something that every single MSP in this chamber can get behind. But despite those good intentions, there are significant failings in its delivery. A survey published by Bliss Scotland found that for every 10 babies needing overnight neonatal care, only 1 room is available for a parent to stay in with their newborn. That's leaving parents with an impossible decision to make. Try and find accommodation close to a hospital, or having to leave their baby overnight in hospital without any option for them to stay with their child. This clearly contradicts the promise that's been set out in the Best Start model that states that parents and carers of those babies must, and that is the important word, must be supported to provide care alongside neonatal staff. And I raised this exact issue in the Chamber last week, and this was following, of course, the damning findings of the recent inspection at Edinburgh Maternity Unit that many colleagues have raised in the Chamber this afternoon. I do appreciate that the Cabinet Secretary, of course, has confirmed that he will write to me on this issue, and I welcome this approach. However, I do hope that when I do receive the letter, that it does provide that detailed explanation on how the Scottish Government is going to make those urgent changes and to make sure that there are beds available for parents who do want to stay with their babies, who are vulnerable, who are sick, and who they want to be nearby because they're in the neonatal departments and they need that support. And I won't accept anything less from the Scottish Government. This should be an issue that we should all get around and support. But of course, it's not just overnight accommodation. Across NHS Highlands, more than 150 pregnant women, as we've heard, have had to endure round trips of 210 miles because consultant-led maternity services were downgraded. And I want to make this point now because we've just heard from Claire Hawkey that apparently MSPs in this chamber are saying that departments are closing. They're not closing, they're being downgraded. That's not spreading misinformation, that's a clear fact, and the fact has been there not just for rural MSPs, but for urban setting MSPs as well, and I certainly will.
Claire Hawkey.
I have to correct Megan Gallagher on that particular point. That has been said, and that misinformation has been spread, that the unit was closing. I accept she may not have said that, but that has been reported.
Megan Gallagher.
Nobody said that in the Chamber this afternoon, and I really hope that MSPs will understand that by saying that things are closing when it's not the case, that's continuing to spread the misinformation and the fear and the alarm in our communities. That's not acceptable, and we shouldn't be tolerating that. But we have heard from MSPs who represent rural areas in this chamber the harrowing stories of mothers giving birth at the side of a road and other mothers experiencing complications while trying to reach Inverness for their services. Why should rural mums have to take on additional risks while in labour? Why has this government failed to provide maternity services closer to home? Downgrading has been the overall strategy for this Scottish Government. The decision to downgrade the neonatal intensive care unit at University of Wishaw Hospital is one of the most alarming examples of the Scottish Government's failure to listen to families and local communities. It's nationally recognised. We've heard that it's an award-winning centre that has saved the lives of some of the sickest babies and most premature babies that we have in my own region. Ministers insist that it's about saving lives, not saving money. But those are empty words and they mean nothing to parents in my own region who are facing the prospect of being moved to another neonatal department in the future. They will continue to campaign and I will continue to back them every step of the way to stop this downgrade. The Best Start plan promised that parents would not be separated from their babies, but if a baby is moved from Lanarkshire to Aberdeen because of this downgrading exercise, it will do exactly that. The Government cannot continue to centralise care at the expense of communities. They need to pause the plan, they need to listen to families and staff who know this service best and commit to retaining Wish's neonatal unit as a full intensive facility. But the Minister also needs to explain how they intend to set up a new task force for maternity and neonatal departments while continuing with the removal, downgrading of services. It just doesn't make sense. Presiding Officer, every baby born in Scotland deserves the best start and every parent deserves to be by their newborn's side. The Minister and the Cabinet Secretary have a tough job today defending the indefensible. But we need to remember this problem is of their own creation. That's why the centralisation of maternity and neonatal services must be paused and an urgent national investigation must be agreed. This is about outcomes, Presiding Officer, and it's not about continuing to fail mothers and babies who deserve our support. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Gallagher. I would remind members that backbench speeches of up to 6 minutes. There is no time in hand and any interventions must be absorbed within the members' agreed allocated speaking time. I call Claire Adamson to be followed by Rosie Grant. Ms Adamson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And can I first start by also paying tribute to the families who have come forward to share their experience. It has been heartbreaking to hear it, and I know how hard that must have been. But without your intervention and your bravery, we wouldn't have some of the information that has come to light, which is important that we all understand that. I had a kind of different speech to the one I am going to use at the moment, but I want to pay tribute to a couple of things that have been mentioned in the Chamber. Pam Duncan-Glancy bringing forward the plight of disabled mothers. In my time in this Parliament, I have seen the information coming through about discrimination also of black and ethnic minority women who had higher mortality rates than other areas of the community, and I believe that this is now well understood and that has been tackled, and that culture within maternity across the world has been changed by some of the research that has been done with regards to those areas. Scotland is a safe place for most births, and that doesn't take away from the bad experiences at all of anyone. But we're broadly in line with the birth mortality rate of the rest of the UK and with our European neighbours, some of which have higher rates like France and Poland. But by and large, we are not an outlier in terms of the statistics. That's the statistics. I know this is about individual cases, and we can't forget that. So every failure is one that will deeply hurt a family, a community, and the clinicians who have been dealing with that baby and the family. And I want to take a moment to thank the staff at Wishaw, who do an incredible job and have been award-winning. But I also have concern for my constituents. Wishaw is, of course, in my constituency, but it services the whole of NHS Lanarkshire. There are about 500 babies born there each year, 40 to 50 a month. The estimated number of babies who would have to be moved to the new alignment of specialist units would be 2, perhaps 3 a month. For the majority of my constituents and all constituents in NHS Lanarkshire, their babies will still go to the neonatal unit in Wishaw, which is not closing, still be served by those exceptional clinicians that are there, and will continue to do this. Yes, I'll take an intervention, Leslie.
Claire Adamson mentions those numbers, and they sound small when they're on a spreadsheet or an email that comes to MSPs. But for those families, and we know the reality is there's no capacity in Glasgow or Edinburgh, they're going to Aberdeen. And in Lanarkshire, we have high levels of poverty, inequality. We're going to separate families at a hugely vulnerable time. You know, it might sound small and it might be a few numbers, but if you add that up, that is a lot of lives that are going to be turned upside down.
Surely
that is worth fighting for.
Claire Adamson.
What I say to Monica Lennon is that we have to look at the clinicians' analysis of this situation. The research worldwide shows that the best care of these very small, very prim babies is done by people who are doing that job almost day in, almost day out. And that builds the expertise and the expertise in the teams. And that will happen at Glasgow. Wishaw, despite its award-winning situation, does not do neonatal surgery. Neonatal surgery for my constituents at the moment will be in Edinburgh or Glasgow, or whichever hospital is in a position to do that across Scotland. And when that very specialist care is needed, that's where that baby should go. And I admit there could be more that could be done with the third sector, with charities, with the government to look at supporting families in that situation. But for the vast majority of people, this is not happening. Now, there has been said that, oh, who's saying this is closing? Who's saying it's closing? Nobody's said that. At the Citizens' Public Petitions Committee in September this year, Ms Bailey is on record saying neonatal unit is closing 3 times. 3 times. She said that the neonatal unit is the best neonatal unit in the country. We know that. Not Scotland, but the whole of the United Kingdom. But for some reason, the Scottish Government then decided it should close. That's an incorrect statement. The Lanarkshire, though, if you let me finish, Ms Bailey, The Lanarkshire is the third largest health board, which covers a population of 655,000 people, would have its neonatal unit removed. An incorrect statement. And it has been said that Wishaw Unit closes, mums and babies cannot go there, but they would have to potentially go to Edinburgh, Aberdeen to be the default. This language, which thankfully the convener of that committee corrected and reminded members that we should not be causing additional alarm to people, but to the core aspect of the petition, which was sustaining the
Ms Adamson has got 12 seconds left.
Not about closure. Can we please, as politicians, examine these issues, have the task force,
Ms Bailey, Ms Adamson will be concluding now. Thank you.
But we shouldn't be causing fear and alarm when it is not required. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Adamson. I do remind members that we are extremely tight for time. I call Rhoda Grant to be followed by Fulton McGregor. Ms Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Centralisation of maternity services has forced mothers to travel long distances, often in dangerous conditions, to reach consultant-led units. We've heard harrowing stories. A woman giving birth at the side of the A96 instead of at Dr Gray's Hospital in Elgin after being forced to be transferred to Aberdeen because the unit was closed. How can that be a safe alternative? I'm really glad that after much campaigning, maternity services have been reinstated at Dr Gray's Hospital, but that's sadly not the case elsewhere. In Caithness, the consultant-led maternity unit was downgraded in 2016 due to a tragic incident when there was no paediatric support available. There is an excellent midwife-led unit in Caithness, but it's 100 miles away from obstetricians and paediatricians. Therefore, the risk of a lengthy transfer has to be factored into decision-making. The roads are poor and they can be absolutely treacherous in winter. Therefore, the vast majority of Caithness births take place in Inverness. Women are being forced to plan to be induced with all the attendant risks of a more acute labour pain and complications. Giving birth in a delivery unit hours from home, away from family and friends, is now sadly the norm for large parts of rural Scotland. Very briefly.
Very briefly, I want to put on record for Claire Adamson's benefit. The maternity service in Stranraer, the birth and suite, which used to be one of the busiest 10 in Scotland, is closed as a result of a lack of midwives, and women in Wigtonshire are expected to make a round trip of 140 miles. That's a fact.
Rhoda Grant.
And that is the case in many parts of Scotland. And even when planning does take place, it doesn't always work out. Jackie Bailey highlighted the case of the twins born in separate hospitals in different counties during a transfer from Caithness to Rigmore. Were it not for the quick-thinking ambulance staff who took an incubator with them when they left Caithness, it could have been very different. Halfway through the journey, the birth of the first twin was imminent, and they stopped at the community hospital in Golspie, and there's no maternity services there. The first twin was born with the assistance of hospital staff and community staff who rallied to the cause. The first twin was then separated from their mother and travelled in the incubator in a second ambulance to Inverness, where the second twin was then subsequently born. The trauma of that is absolutely unthinkable. Yet, despite being asked on numerous occasions, NHS Highland has not risk-assessed that journey. On another occasion, a woman was turned away at the door of Rigmore after travelling for more than 2 hours in labour, then having to travel on to Aberdeen and Dundee. Being turned away is very common because a woman who is not close to giving birth are not admitted to the Inverness maternity unit due to the lack of space. Instead, they're asked to wait somewhere else, to walk around the retail park while they're having contractions. Many have been asked to travel back home many hours and return again when they're close to delivery. These women live in Caithness, they live in Westeros, West Sutherland, Skye and Lochaber, many miles from Regmore Hospital. Surely driving long distances with someone beside you who is having contractions on very poor roads cannot possibly be safe. To travel 3 hours from Skye, only to be told late at night to go home and return again in the morning, is inhumane. There is not space in the Inverness maternity unit to cater for those who cannot go home. Whistleblowers have said that staffing and accommodation is inadequate, putting intolerable strain on the staff that work there. Yet the Scottish Government has put on hold the capital spending to upgrade the unit with no prospect of this work being carried out. I recently met a young mum who went to Inverness to be induced. She could not get into the maternity unit, but she was eventually given accommodation. Her partner was also given accommodation, but it was in an absolutely, totally different building. She had already been induced and was in pain. She was in a strange place, on her own, with no one to turn to. When she was eventually taken into the maternity unit and gave birth, she was told her baby was unwell and needed special care services. There was no space in the unit in Inverness, and he would have to be flown to another hospital. She was asked the question whether she wanted her husband to stay with her or go with their newborn baby. What kind of choice was that? What made that worse was many hours later, worrying about what was happening, she discovered that her parents were waiting outside the hospital to be with her, and her husband and baby were in the Inverness Special Care Baby Unit because a bed had become available. It doesn't need to be like this. You know, we need to make sure that midwife-led community units are safe and low risk. They are. But when something goes wrong, there has to be a plan B. James Bingham told the Caithness Action Team that geographical distance and transfer times between Caithness and Regmore is greater than what is considered to be safe for a primary birthing unit. We need a plan B. There is a plan B in Orkney, which allows babies to be born there. There is no plan B for Caithness. Should we be using Scotstar to provide that? And, Presiding Officer, can I just finish with a quote
could you please
from
conclude, because you're over your time, Ms Grant,
who said, women don't feel safe anymore. It's barbaric. We don't matter up here. That's what it feels like.
Thank you, Ms Grant. I would remind members yet again that they have speeches as they have agreed to and Parliament has approved in terms of the timing of this debate of up to 6 minutes. I call Fulton McGregor to be followed by Sue Webber. Mr McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I start by also paying tribute to the families who have came forward and informed this debate and came forward so bravely. At the heart of today's discussion lies an issue of the deepest importance: the safety, dignity and well-being of mothers, babies and families across our country. Let me begin by acknowledging the concerns that have been raised following recent inspection reports into maternity services. These reports highlight serious issues in some areas, and the Scottish Government takes those findings extremely seriously, as we've heard today. Where any failings have been identified, immediate action has been demanded, and quite rightly so. We know that safe, effective care depends on well-supported staff, and that's why this Government has made record investments in our NHS, including specific funding to increase the number of midwives across the country. As we have heard, the Government have also established a new maternity and neonatal oversight group, providing strategic leadership and accountability for these vital services. This group will ensure that every NHS board is supported and, where necessary, challenged to deliver the safest and most consistent standards of care. Scotland benefits from a strong, independent inspection regime through Healthcare Improvement Scotland. The Scottish Government has commissioned HIS to develop new national maternity standards, which will be published early next year. These standards will further strengthen consistency and quality across Scotland, ensuring that every woman and baby, regardless of where they live, can expect the same high level of safe, person-centred care. Now, I know some of my colleagues have already commented on the recent HIS report into NHS loathing, which the Government is deeply concerned by. However, like others, I will take the opportunity to raise concerns that my constituents have brought to me for those expectant mothers in Lanarkshire. Now, like other Lanarkshire MSPs, everyone that's spoken today has mentioned it, I have also had meetings and contact from constituents and staff in relation to the situation at Wishaw Neonatal, and those have included meetings with the Minister as well. And it's safe to say that people are generally not happy with the decision, and you can see that from the number of people who have signed the petition. Now, I know that opposition parties in here have a certain narrative on this, and the government has another. We've heard that already play out today, so I won't go into that again. I feel that the Parliament has a responsibility to people. So while I do think that the opposition members have a duty to be responsible in what they are saying about the realignment of services in Lanarkshire and the safety of children, I also believe the government needs to be open to working with local communities and be willing to change their minds. People in Lanarkshire feel it's a downgrade, and I don't think that we can just tell them, and I know it's led clinically, and the Cabinet Secretary has made that point, but even despite that, I don't think we can just tell them how they should feel and that their experiences and views are wrong. And I'm absolutely sure that no one has this intention, but it is what a lot of people believe has happened. So I think it's incumbent on the government to respond to this. I'm not going to have time, apologies. The government to respond to this compassionately. I think there needs to be more middle ground on this issue, with both the government and the opposition moving into a position where more agreement can be found. It's an issue far too big for party politics. It's big for my constituents, and I'll leave those comments on this issue there. I also want to raise the case of a constituent who I mentioned during the Cabinet Secretary's statement last week, who contacted me specifically about her experience being pregnant, which culminated in a traumatic experience during childbirth and an exhausting fight to be heard afterwards. I should also say, just for clarity, the baby is now doing well. I have written to the Cabinet Secretary on these issues, and I know a response is imminent, but I feel I must raise my constituent's case here again on the record, as it's imperative that all mothers feel that they are an integral part of their care and decision-making process when they are pregnant and giving birth. Presiding Officer, even one case like my constituents is one too many, but it's important to acknowledge that significant progress in Scotland has been made over the past 2 decades. Rates of stillbirth, infant mortality and neonatal deaths have fallen markedly. These improvements are the result of sustained investment, innovation and collaboration between clinicians, midwives and the government. I should also say, as I did last week in the Chamber, that as a family we have had 3 fantastic experiences at Wishaw General Maternity on the birth of our 3 children, and found the staff each time responsive, helpful and utterly professional. And as Willie Rennie said, while I know that this experience is very much the normal, as an MSP, sometimes it is our job here to represent constituents who don't get the norm. And it's important that everyone gets the same service. And when they don't, such as in the case of my constituent that I've mentioned, lessons are learned. Presiding Officer, I'd like to raise another issue, which I hope I will have time to, and one from another constituent who I know does so much for families across Lanarkshire and indeed Scotland, and that's Julie Morrison from the fabulous Baby Loss Retreat, who wrote to me just this week again asking for clarification on what regulation or oversight is currently in place for private clinics offering non-NHS pregnancy scans. I put this to the Government, and I thank the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health for a response which clarified that independent clinics where services are provided by a doctor, dentist, nurse, midwife or dental technician have to register with the HIS, and that any clinics registered with the HIS are inspected to ensure they meet the rigorous standards expected of their NHS counterparts. I will therefore use this opportunity, to urge anyone who may be considering opting for a scan out with the NHS for any reason to select a provider that is regulated by HIS. Presiding Officer, it won't surprise you that I had other things to say, but I'm not going to have time, so I just want to conclude by saying that while we recognise the progress we have made, the dedication of our NHS staff and the decisive action already underway to make services even safer, we must also acknowledge the challenges highlighted in recent reports and those testimonies shared today, and ensure that constituents that come to us with concerns feel validated and heard, and most importantly, that lessons are learned and our services continue to be amongst the best and safest in the world.
Thank you, Ms McGregor. I call Sue Webber to be followed by Emma Harper. Ms Webber.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's a fact that there are huge inequalities when it comes to women's health. Today, we're considering the failings of one critical element in women's health, the state of our maternity services in Scotland. The failings in our maternity services have not happened overnight. They are a symptom of years of mismanagement, neglect and lack of investment. In Scotland, the NHS has been under SNP management for now circa 20 years. And it's a grim fact that maternity services continue to fail women and families across Scotland. And like many others, I believe that their plans to cut the number of neonatal intensive care units are dangerous. Women in rural areas are already forced to travel long distances to give birth, thanks to the downgrading of local maternity units across Scotland. Journeys that I have made on numerous occasions in my life before this chamber, from Raigmore to Caithness, from Dr Gray's to Aberdeen Royal. These roads are challenging to drive at the best of times, never mind when an expectant father is driving his pregnant partner with them, with all the pressure that entails. And yet the SNP plan to cut the number of neonatal intensive care units from 8 to 3. Why 3, not 5? And this would force families to travel to Glasgow, Edinburgh or Aberdeen in order to seek treatment for the most preterm and sickest babies. Ninewells in Dundee. Yes, I will, Mr Gray.
Cabinet Secretary.
Sue Webber asks why 3 and not 5, and that's because that was the direct recommendation of the Best Start report, which recommended moving to 3 units within 5 years.
Sue Webber.
3 to 5, as in not a dash, the number 2. So you had the letter TO, you had the choice of going somewhere between 3 or 4 or 5. Ninewells in Dundee, Princess Royal Maternity in Glasgow, Wishaw General in Wishaw, Victoria Hospital Kirkcaldy, Crosshouse Kilmarnock, they have all been downgraded under these plans, with at least 22,100 people across Scotland signing a petition to the Scottish Parliament protesting that these plans, yet the SNP don't listen. I could continue to list the SNP failures across the country, but today I want to focus on NHS Lothian in my region. It's been well over a year since an employee at Edinburgh's Royal Infirmary blew the whistle about conditions in that maternity unit, and nearly a year since the subsequent investigation revealed staff shortages and a toxic management culture. In August 24, new mother Louise Williamson spoke out about her horrific labour, which was when she was repeatedly ignored. In December, NHS Lothian said that action had been taken. The report uncovered by the BBC last December upheld or partially upheld 17 concerns about safety, and NHS Lothian claimed work was underway to improve patient safety and the working environment and culture. On June the 20th this year, I was amongst a group of MSPs and MPs who were told in a health authority briefing that the culture was being fixed. But 3 days later, there was an unannounced inspection at the unit by HIS, which revealed just how much work was still needed. The depth of the problems revealed in the BBC investigation last year, mums and newborn babies coming to harm because of the poor culture and staffing situation in the unit, was such that an instantaneous reversal was improbable. However, the reality is that it's taken an unannounced inspection to confirm that nothing has changed. After many reassurances that issues were in hand and would improve, I was shocked by the damning inspection into that maternity services at the Royal. Because we know now from the publication of the HIS report last week that it's still in the grip of a crisis, and that doesn't fully explain the everything's in hand message that I was given in June, nor does it give me any faith that the assurances given in the wake of the revelations can be trusted. Healthcare Improvement Scotland's unannounced inspection of the Royal Infirmary Edinburgh revealed a culture of mistrust and staffing shortages that led to delays in the induction of labour process of up to 29 hours. The inspectors also found frustration with staffing levels, which presented a safety risk, and staff were overwhelmed, unsupported and not listened to, that there was a reluctance to submit incident reports, and staff described a culture of mistrust. And following the HIS inspections report last week, I asked the Scottish Government about public confidence in NHS Lothian delivering the needed changes, because women deserve to know their maternity services are safe. But NHS Lothian told MSPs last week that these issues would take time to resolve. Do we have time? Professor Hiscock has said that 72 additional midwives will be working by the end of the year, with 30 in position to meet basic legal requirements. That's a staggering admission of the previous failures in itself, and exposes how much inequality there is in women's health provision, because it's hard to imagine any other service being allowed to deteriorate in this way. It should never have got to the situation where undercover investigations and inspections were needed. The Health Secretary, Mr Gray, has rightly put NHS Lothian's maternity services into special measures, and I thank him for this critical intervention. But what confidence can we offer to our constituents that we will see the real tangible changes and improvements in safety? The BBC Disclosure programme was a heart-wrenching watch. One woman described how she made to feel like a nuisance by the staff in her West Coast maternity unit. Our maternity services must put families first and provide compassionate and empathetic care and support. They must have safe staffing levels where staff are valued and given every opportunity to deliver the best care. After all, having worked in healthcare for nearly 30 years before being in this role, I know that is why midwives enter this profession. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Webber. I call Emma Harper to be followed by Michael Mara. Ms Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm speaking today on an issue that touches the very heart of family life and the values that we hold dear, and it is the safety and quality of maternity services in Scotland. And like Claire Adamson, I've altered my speech notes quite extensively during this debate since it began. The Health Care Improvement Scotland, his inspection report into maternity services at the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh has rightly prompted serious reflection and urgent action. And I too want to begin by acknowledging the experience of the families who bravely shared their stories, and I extend my deepest condolences to all of them. Their courage in speaking out will help drive improvements that we all want to see. The HIS report identified 26 areas requiring improvement, including delays of up to 29 hours for induction of labour, staffing shortages, suboptimal skill mix and gaps in incident reporting. Inspectors also highlighted cultural issues such as staff feeling overwhelmed, unsupported and reluctant to escalate concerns. These findings are concerning and cannot be ignored. However, it is important to stress that these challenges, while serious, do not mean our maternity services are unsafe overall. Scotland's hospitals remain among the safest places to give birth. The Health Secretary made this clear in his ministerial statement last week when he said that the commitment to continuous improvement is unwavering. The Scottish Government has acted decisively. Following his report, NHS Lothian's maternity services have been escalated to level 3 of the NHS Scotland Support and Intervention Framework, ensuring enhanced scrutiny and immediate support. This is not a token gesture, it is a robust mechanism that brings additional leadership, resources and accountability to drive rapid improvement. A new Scottish Maternity and Neonatal Task Force has been established, chaired by the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health. This task force will include voices from service users, frontline staff, independent bodies and third sector organisations. Its remit is clear. The remit is to provide national oversight, share best practice and ensure lessons are learned quickly across Scotland. Leadership has been strengthened with the appointment of a dedicated Associate Medical Director of Women's Services, and cultural improvement initiatives are underway. These steps demonstrate that the Government is not waiting for change, it is driving the change. Presiding Officer, while issues are addressed in Lothian, I must acknowledge the concerns raised in Wigtonshire and Stranraer, and I know the ministers in front of me will be expecting me to represent my constituents. Since the closure of the birthing suite, the clinic suite at Galloway Community Hospital in 2018, expectant mothers have faced journeys of up to 70 miles along the A75 to Dumfries and Galloway Royal Infirmary. And safety is my primary concern in all of this. Choice is also a crucial part in this person-centred approach. And I need to remind Chamber that I was a clinical nurse educator prior to coming to this Parliament. And as a peri-operative nurse, part of my education role was to teach midwives and junior doctors how to provide safe care during C-sections or urgent and crash C-sections. I will if you're really quick, because time is tight.
Carmogan.
Thank you. I mean, the member knows that I always value her sort of professional background. One of the things in the task force is around that leadership and mentorship and how some investment needs to go into that. Would you support that?
Emma Harper.
Absolutely, I would support developing leaders and mentors and everything. My 30 years as a nurse was spent mentoring and guiding and teaching people in trauma surgery and trauma-type situations, which are very stressful, actually. So, Presiding Officer, following the 72-mile journey, some women were told that they had showed up too early and then were sent home again. And I myself, as an MSP, have called on NHS Dumfries and Galloway to provide holding accommodation while labour progresses, but I can't see that this is happening at all. I don't think we should be sending people home in early stages of labour if their home is 72 miles away. Women have been having babies in lay-bys and also in ambulances because mothers could not reach the hospital in time. And as I said, safety and choice is my primary concern. Women have described the experience as frightening, exhausting and traumatising, with some even reconsidering pregnancy because of the lack of local birthing provision. And I know there is a wide range of perinatal services that are provided in Stranraer, but actual birthing isn't taking place. And an independent review recommended a midwife-led birthing service for low-risk births in Stranraer. But looking at the numbers, last year 1,054 babies were born in Dumfries and Galloway. 20% are considered low risk, so that means 210 babies were low-risk births in Dumfries and Galloway last year. So there's obviously challenges in our rural areas. I support, and I'm appealing to the Minister, any progress to help improve perinatal care and provide confidence to expectant mums and their families in the west of the South West region. I know the Scottish Government has been working on maternity safety for years. The Best Start 5-year plan sets out a vision for maternity and neonatal care focused on continuity, safety and family-centred support. And more recently, the Government introduced new clinical guidance, a miscarriage framework and an action plan to tackle racialised health inequalities in maternity care, and others have mentioned that as well. These initiatives reflect a proactive, systemic approach and not a reactive one. So, Presiding Officer, to conclude, it's not just about fixing problems, it's about building a culture of trust, learning and continuous improvement. We owe that to the families who have shared their stories, to the staff who care for us and to every child born in Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Harper. I call Michael Mara to be followed by Karen Adam. Mr Mara.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My constituents in Dundee and the surrounding areas are deeply concerned by the proposal to downgrade the neonatal ICU at Ninewells Hospital, because that is what the SNP government is trying to do. I wrote to the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health on this issue, and the response, I'm afraid, was an exercise hiding behind pedantry and semantics, when the government should be levelling with the public. This is a downgrade, and they should be fully honest about that. Babies born under 28 weeks will not be cared for in Dundee. The idea that this vital service will continue in my community is simply untrue. And if these plans go ahead, there will no longer be a neonatal intensive care unit at Ninewells. The facility will be downgraded to a local neonatal unit. The most premature and sickest babies would be treated in Glasgow, Edinburgh and Aberdeen. Those are the facts. In recent weeks, there has been an outpouring of stories locally, with many of my constituents sharing how Ninewells neonatal ICU cared for their baby and their family at the most difficult moments of their lives. My constituent Zoe's son Archie was born at 27 weeks and 4 days and spent months in Ninewells. She says, without the specialist neonatal care he received, my son would not be here today. At the prospect of downgrading Ninewells neonatal ICU, Zoe said, it will break families, it will cost lives, it will deepen inequality, especially for those who cannot afford travel or accommodation to be near their baby. Cutting NICU services is not a restructuring, it is a direct threat to vulnerable babies and their families. Zoe is among the 22,108 people who have signed a petition against this downgrading. So is another constituent, Nicola. She paid tribute to the skilled and dedicated team at Ninewells. In her words, they picked me up and put me back together again to be a good mum for Leo. They are on top of their game in intensive care for neonates. We don't want to lose that level of care, skills or staff. Nicola went on to say, travelling to another city in an ambulance, if there is one available, for what could be weeks and months in parent accommodation, if there are any rooms, is isolating and expensive. It would be a great shame to put families through this when facilities and trained staff are already in place in Dundee. And I do, Presiding Officer, genuinely fear for the pipeline of future staff, the next generation of nurses and doctors training in Dundee, who will miss out on key elements of that training for the most acute of emergency cases. Our partnership between the University of Dundee and Ninewells Hospital has delivered exemplary training to thousands of doctors and nurses in our city for decades. But without this key element of their training being available in the city of Dundee, can we have confidence in delivering the future scale of specialism and expertise that our country needs? Perhaps the Minister might address some of those issues in her closing remarks. But the SNP government says that this only affects a small number of babies. But do these babies not matter? Kids like Archie and Leo. Do the families in Dundee not deserve the same access to care that Zoe and Nicola received? Ministers say that women can be transferred to neonatal ICUs in Aberdeen, Edinburgh and Glasgow in advance. They must know that premature births can happen at any time and often occur unexpectedly. A pregnant woman in Dundee would be many miles from the neonatal ICU when she goes into labour. Downgrading Ninewell's neonatal ICU is also part of a trend of maternity service downgrading and closures in the region. In Angus, there was the loss of Montrose Community Midwifery in 2016 and the scrapping of the replacement Montrose unit for North Angus in 2013. And ever more centralisation of services by this government is frankly dangerous for mothers and for babies. And all of this comes on the heels of a deeply concerning inspection report, highlighted by other members already, into maternity services at Ninewells, which I raised with the First Minister here in the Chamber on the 15th of May of this year. Worrying reports of delays to triage, variation in how women were assessed, delays to induction of labour of up to 72 hours, staff unsure of the location of the emergency medication for birthing and the process for accessing it, equipment, missing leads, meaning only 3 of 5 fetal heartbeat monitors were in full working order, hard-working staff under pressure due to workload and high levels of sick leave. It's absolutely vital, Cabinet Secretary, that we rebuild public confidence in the service. And so Labour's call for a national investigation into maternity and neonatal services across Scotland could not be more critical. The Government should not hide behind their task force. It's abundantly clear that real change is needed and they must grip that challenge today. The Director of the Royal College of Midwives Scotland has stated that RCM has been raising the exact same concerns that the inspections have found with the Scottish Government and with individual health boards for years. We have urged this Cabinet Secretary and his predecessors to get ahead of the curve and implement the changes we know need to happen. This knackered SNP Government always seems to be behind the curve. They have broken our National Health Service and put mothers' and babies' lives at risk. We need this report. We need to make sure that there is an investigation, and it needs to happen now.
Thank you, Mr Mara. And I call Karen Adam. Ms Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to start particularly with an acknowledgement to anyone who has been let down by our maternity or neonatal services. Those families suffer greatly, and any death or injury is an absolute tragedy. And any time a concern was raised or not acted upon, it's simply not good enough. People who live with those experiences do deserve to be heard, believed and shown as well what is changing, because they took that effort to speak up. The Scottish Government has been clear that they will ensure to learn from every case and improve care and strengthen patient safety. And I'm glad to hear that as parents and families, particularly, they need to feel that and see that in action, not just hear that in words in this chamber today. I come to this with a little bit of my own experience. I've had 6 babies, and I was very lucky enough to be there at the birth of my first grandchild. And I've seen the difference that good care really makes. But I've also seen when poor care has been involved. I've seen poor practice that actually leaves a mark, and it's a lasting mark. So I understand the difference that it makes when you're listened to, when plans are explained, and when you're treated as a partner in those decisions. And that should be the baseline everywhere and every time. In recent weeks, families have contacted us after difficult coverage that we've seen. And they want straight answers, but they also want visible action. We should be honest about where culture has fallen short, and we should also be clear about the work that is already underway. Independent, unannounced inspections by Healthcare Improvement Scotland are finding issues on the ground, but they're also driving immediate improvements. And that is scrutiny doing exactly what it should. But it only builds trust if boards act quickly and report openly, so families can see that change. National standards for maternity care have been commissioned to make expectations clear for everyone, and ministers have said inspection findings will be acted on decisively. Clear standards, honest inspection and rapid local action, and that is how we build confidence. Feeling safe is not only about what happens when something goes wrong, it's about the care that people receive every day. And I'm glad that the Scottish Patient Safety Perinatal Improvement Programme and Best Start Supporting Boards are there to try and improve that day-to-day practice. Better handovers, clearer communication and stronger teamwork, particularly in emergencies. And that is how care becomes more personal and more reliable, and not just a postcode lottery. Continuity matters too, and women should have a named midwife and a small team that they see regularly without being passed from pillar to post, because that lowers stress and it improves outcomes. I've believed that for many years, and I remember, I should maybe declare an interest, I signed a petition when I was expecting my 5th child, because I knew how important that was because of my lived experience, and I still believe that now. So let's make continuity real for the women who need it the most, particularly those like myself who have high-risk pregnancies, and then build it across the service so it's the norm and not just an exception. So when something does go wrong, families should get a plain language explanation and be able to see what has changed as a result. Staff should be supported to speak up and be heard. And boards must act immediately when concerns are identified. Families should be able to see that action and not have to chase it. But we should also keep sight of progress. Over the last 2 decades, Scotland has reduced infant mortality, neonatal deaths and stillbirths, supported by more midwives and consultants. And that does matter, but progress is never a finish line, and it's a responsibility to keep on moving. When inspection flags risks, action must be quick and visible, and when culture falls short, leadership then must step in. When families ask for clarity, they should not be met with jargon, and when improvement is working, we should scale it and then sustain it. A new early pregnancy, maternity and neonatal oversight group will keep an eye on that delivery, but what matters most is that families feel the difference when that care is given. Birth trauma needs plain speaking. If you were ever dismissed, not believed or left without answers, that matters. And you're not making a fuss if you still feel that aftershocks months or even years later. Services must be trauma-informed, postnatal debriefs that actually answer questions, easy routes into perinatal mental health support and care that recognises how poverty, disability, rurality and language can compound risk and fear. Equity here is not a slogan, it must be a part of safety. And we must keep the focus on what happens in the room with the women in that moment. Listen early, act quickly and be clear. Make real continuity, keep instructions sharp and updates plain so families can see progress without having to fight for it. It sets us up in those early days for a real well-being society as a whole. And I'll finish simply. This is about trust, and it's about care you can rely on. If we hold to those basics, we will not just talk about safer, kinder, more consistent care, but we will deliver it, excuse the pun, for every family in Scotland, as we absolutely should. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Adam. We will now move to closing speeches. I call on Alex Gough-Hamilton to close on behalf of the Scottish Liberal Democrats. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm very grateful to the Labour Party for giving their time to this important debate this afternoon. And I rise in support of the amendment in the name of Willie Rennie. It speaks, I think, to one of the most geographically punishing health inequalities in the British Isles. The maternity services at Caithness General, Presiding Officer, were downgraded in 2016. That was the year that I and many of us entered this Parliament for the first time. That decision has forced mums, pregnant mums, sometimes in active labour, down the arduous and treacherous stretch of the A9, the 100 miles it takes them to get to Raigmore, whether that's through the snow or through the dark, with deer on the road and the attendant concern about vehicular crash. And every day, from that day to this day, we have stood with, my party has stood with, those community campaigners, the Caithness Health Action Team in particular, in support of the restoration of those services. Because That decision, presiding officer, denies expecting mums fast access to obstetric expertise and care in the event of rare and serious events. It demands arduous travel and delay, heightening both risk and stress on perhaps the most vulnerable day in that person's life. It is a situation which has commanded the attention of the United Nations itself, who regard this as an abject failure on the right to health for mums in rural and remote parts of this country. And that denial, presiding officer, of human rights is measured out in near misses and in negative health outcomes. We have heard from Jackie Bailey and Rhoda Grant about the split-site twins who were born either end of the northernmost leg of the A9, or the newborn who suffered brain damage in October 2022 as a direct result of the 3-hour journey it took to get mum to Raigmore. That is, I believe, a concrete example of an adverse neonatal outcome, if ever there was one. Or the case of Shelley Mowat. I will give way to Douglas.
Douglas Ross.
I'm grateful to Alex Cole-Hamilton for giving way, and I think what the Liberal Democrats have put in their amendment is extremely valuable, which is why we support it. Does he also think there is a need to look at the Scottish Neonatal Transport Service? Because they have 3 bases across the country, but the one that covers the north, covering Caithness, could see the response being situated in Shetland or in Tayside when it's actually needed in Moray or Caithness. Is that something we need to look at as well?
I think we need to look at provision for expectant mums in the round, so I welcome Douglas Ross's intervention there. Or the case of Shelley Mowat, who developed a potentially life-threatening blood clot again in 2018 as a result of the protracted journey she faced to Raigmore. Not to mention, and I think Jackie Bailey rightly touched on this briefly in her remarks, the many, many mums who, when they have completed that arduous journey, are turned away at the doors of Raigmore because of staffing and capacity pressures in that hospital, sometimes increasing their journey time to up to 12 hours, and excessive waits and complications that come with that. All we are asking for in Willie Rennie's amendment, presiding officer, is that mums in the far north are offered the same consideration that was offered to those in Moray, who, following the kind of independent review that we are calling for, have now seen their access to a full spectrum of maternity services begin to return at Dr. Gray's. Today, we will witness a welcome departure from the traditional refusal and denial of SNP ministers. I welcome that. It is a long time coming, nearly a decade in coming. And by agreeing to our amendment, as I'm so glad the Cabinet Secretary has signalled, he will hand a victory not to the Liberal Democrats, but to the campaigners, to the patients, to the mums, to the midwives in the far north who have been crying out for this independent review for many, many years. So I hope that as the government concludes tonight, they will give us some detail, because it's clear that by majority this Parliament will this evening vote for the Liberal Democrat amendment, and by so doing instruct and commission an independent review into maternity services in the far north. I have never accepted that it's a binary equation of leaving mums unsafe in the far north or forcing them to come to Raigmore. We have heard many examples of very effective models that are working in other remote and rural parts of the country, whether that's Orkney or other parts, islands as well. But I'm very clear that in passing this Parliament then has a responsibility to hold this government's feet to the fire. If we agree, as we will do, to commission that independent review, then that can't just be the last we hear of it. The government must, in short order, explain to this chamber when that review will be commissioned, when it expects it to report, and how and by what means the campaigners and the communities of the far north can feed into it, because it is only the lived experience of the mums who right now may be travelling that treacherous 100 miles, which takes more than 2 hours to cover, doing battle with sightseers on the North Coast 500 on the most important day of their life. We should not expect them to face that journey and sometimes face it alone. So I'm very grateful to the government for accepting our amendment. It is a victory for the campaigners in the far north. It's been a long time coming. It's been far too long coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Cole-Hamilton. I now call Patrick Harvey to close on behalf of the Scottish Greens. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In closing for my party, I'd like to begin where I started with my opening speech of recognising the tone that many members have struck in taking part in this debate. Jackie Baillie, I think, might forgive me if I say that on another day, on another topic, she's capable of party political point scoring as much as anybody. But she very clearly recognised that that was not the way to take forward today's debate. And I think a number of members have done so. In fact, Jackie Baillie and Neil Gray both recognised the profound human impact on families who have been failed and our shared responsibility to them. As well as reflecting on issues in the inspection reports, the BBC documentary, as well as their own constituent caseload, members across the Chamber have spoken up on behalf of people they've met, as well as reflecting their own personal experience and offering views on the overall provision of service in different parts of the country. I think it's important and legitimate to reflect the fact that people can disagree in good faith on some of those delivery questions about the nature and design of services and have a responsibility to speak up for their constituents. But a debate like this one should not be about assigning blame. It should be about seeking to restore trust with those families and NHS staff who feel that they have been failed. A number of members spoke with professional expertise, as well as deep compassion and personal experience. There are too many to mention, but I did want to pick out Claire Hockey's speech, who brought those different elements together, and I think it's significant that we have somebody chairing the Health Committee who's able to do that. That kind of content, that kind of contribution should have characterised the whole debate this afternoon. There will be those listening who have heard serious and thoughtful and informed debate, and they will also have heard a fair amount of political accusation and counter-accusation. And I don't imagine that that's what they wanted to hear when they started listening. Staff, patients, inspection reports, documentaries, all have brought to us the severe challenges that are felt throughout the system, as well as the many cases in which there have been unacceptable failings and the human impact on people in those situations. Our job, and by our I mean Parliament as well as government, our job is to decide what to do about it. Now, I've heard a very clear demand from across the Chamber for a national investigation. I can't hear any reason to reject that on principle. I do see a case for allowing clinical expertise to shape that national investigation, to define its scope and its timing. So I am willing to allow the government to go through that process if they can give us, and this is what I would like to hear in the Minister's closing speech, because the Minister herself will be chairing this task force. But it's not simply a question of waiting for the task force to form a view. The Minister has a view in shaping the approach of the task force in the way that she leads it. So what I would like to hear before we finish the debate this afternoon is a clear sense from the government that it intends to use its leadership of that task force to ensure that the question of a national investigation, which is sought for across the Chamber, that question is a matter of what and how, not a matter of whether. I didn't hear that in the opening speeches. I hope to hear it in the closing speeches. And, Presiding Officer, I'll return the remainder of my time to you.
Thank you, Mr Harvey. I now call on Stephen Kerr to close on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Look, I hate to disagree so openly with Patrick Harvey, but this is a Parliament, and there is such a thing as political accountability. The situations that we're discussing today lead on inexorably from political decisions and priorities. And for us to ignore that and somehow seek to deconstruct the issue, to somehow hide behind some fake unanimity in this chamber about where culpability lies, I think would not be honest of many of us. at the end of the day, I would appeal to Patrick Harvie on the issue of the national investigation as well, because you can't divorce culture from any operation, whether we're talking about the design and delivery of maternity services or any other subject. When it comes to the actual execution and delivery of anything, culture is at the very heart of whether it succeeds or not. And so much of what we have said in the debate this afternoon comes down to an issue of culture and what that has as an impact on the way that services are being delivered. I will give way.
Patrick Harvie.
I'm grateful to the member for giving way. It sounds as though he thinks I've just argued against a national investigation. I have argued very clearly in favour of it, and I want the government to say that they are in favour of it as well. That's what I want to hear, and I will hold the government to account as much as anybody else in this chamber if they make that commitment. That's the commitment I want to hear.
Stephen Kerr.
And I respect what Patrick Harvie has just said. Brief,
Jackie
yes,
Bailey.
Brief.
Would he acknowledge that in reading the government's amendment, it says if, not it will? It's if.
Stephen Kerr.
I think it's now impossible for the Minister to change the wording in the government's amendment. And therefore I would appeal to Patrick Harvie to join with others in this chamber who are going to demand, I think correctly, rightly, a national investigation into maternity services in Scotland. And I hope he will consider the importance of this to so many people, including people that are here present with us in the public gallery today. And I would like to thank everyone who's spoken in the debate, but I would specifically like to mention something that Willie Rennie said, because he rightly mentioned duty of candour. Now, yesterday, in a related matter, I wrote to the First Minister about the Public Office Accountability Bill, the Hillsborough Law, which is an important part of enshrining. It's going to enshrine duty of candour into law. And I'm asking the Scottish Government to bring forward an LCM that would mean that all of the provisions of that bill would apply to Scotland, including the right to legal representation and legal aid for families who are impacted by service failure. And I think we all know why it's called the Hillsborough Law. That bill is introduced in the House of Commons in September, does seek to establish the statutory duty of candour, and it is also about guaranteed parity of arms when it comes to legal representation, as I've said. And it has real implications for everything we're talking about right here and now, because it's not just about legal change, it's about a culture change in our public services, one that affirms truth-telling, transparency and responsibility, with an expectation on those who will hold public office to adhere to the Nolan principles, not just as a concept, but in practice. So I would also say, in relation to the national investigation, in relation to what Willie Rennie said, that he mentioned how important it is that someone from outside of the system be involved in that national investigation. I think that's so important, because some of the things we're talking about today are, by definition, systemic. And therefore, to understand the system, sometimes, frankly, you have to step well outside of the system. You have to have someone who doesn't, if I may coin a phrase, have a dog in the fight, to look at this fairly and squarely, in a way, without prejudice, without bias. And so I hope that when we do get this national investigation, because I hope we will vote for it tonight, that there will be an outside of the system element to the leadership of that investigation. Other colleagues have spoken about all kinds of things. I thought Michael Mara's comment about 9 wells. Let's not lose sight of the fact that when HIS did its initial investigation and published its report, they went back to 9 wells to discover what? To discover that not much had been done. Not much progress had been made. That is the issue that demands the national investigation. That's why we have to talk about culture in the whole. And that's why tonight this Parliament must instruct the government to get on with the delivery of that national investigation. Nothing goes to the heart of our conscience as parliamentarians, or as Scots even, if I may put it as broadly as that, than the safety of mothers and babies. And what we have heard today, what we have read in recent weeks and months in relation to the reports, documentation that's accompanied the work that's been done in Edinburgh and in Nine Wells is indefensible. In Edinburgh...
Mr Kerr, please bring your remarks to a close. You're over your time.
Well, let me just conclude by saying, again, I urge all of us as parliamentarians with a duty to our constituents to support the motion as it will be amended. But let us act, not posture. Let's make things better. Let's not hide behind the inconvenient myths that we sometimes tell ourselves.
Thank you, Mr.
Let
Kerr.
the safety of women and babies in Scotland be something that
Kerr.
doesn't wait another day.
I now call on Jenny Minto. Minister, up to 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too would like to thank Jackie Baillie for bringing this debate to the Chamber. I am hugely grateful for the thoughtful and heartfelt contributions from members across the Chamber. This subject does go above party politics. Please also allow me to echo the Cabinet Secretary's opening remarks. I do not underestimate how difficult today's debate will have been for the families in attendance today who have been affected by the issues. I thank them too for so powerfully sharing their experiences in the disclosure documentary to enable change. And I extend my deepest condolences to you personally and to anyone affected by those issues. There is no doubt that we all agree that delivering safe, high-quality maternity care for all mothers, babies and families in Scotland must be a priority. I'd like to just make some progress, please, Mr Sweeney. I want to first of all reiterate the assurance that we provided to women and families last week that maternity and neonatal services are safe. The vast majority of women and their families have very good experiences, as others have noted, of their maternity care and have high praise for the caring, compassionate and professional staff in those who look after them. And over the last 2 years, I have had the privilege to visit maternity and neonatal services across Scotland, from some of our largest units to our smallest, and to meet with the staff, service users and service leaders. And I've seen firsthand the tremendous work delivered by our maternity and neonatal service staff. I believe, though, we do, and there always will be, room for improvement. Our approach to maternity and neonatal services is firmly grounded in evidence. Together with the nations across the rest of the UK, we commissioned the National Maternity and Neonatal Audit Programmes and the Embrace UK confidential inquiries, which give us rich data about our services and allow us to benchmark. Mr
Willie Rennie.
The Minister quite rightly paid tribute to those who are in the gallery today. But they've been pretty clear they want a national investigation. Patrick Harvey, in an interesting contribution, said that while he is prepared to accept the process, that he thinks it should be a matter of when rather than if we have a national investigation. So will she agree to a national investigation now?
Minister. I think we have to be clear that the reports that we rely on also illustrate the growing complexities around birth and changing demographics across the UK. And this means it's even more important than ever to ensure that all women receive care and support tailored to their needs, but also that our services adapt and evolve to meet those changing needs. I'd also like to say a little more about the Scottish Maternity. I would like to continue about the Scottish Maternity and Neonatal Task Force that I will chair. As the Cabinet Secretary identified last week, it will provide strategic national leadership and will include senior figures from across our health system and independent bodies, as well as third sector and advocacy organisations. I have also been clear that I want women's and families' voices and their experiences of maternity services to be heard by the task force, as well as the voices of frontline midwives, nurses and doctors. Their voices will be at the heart of the group. I thank Patrick Harvey for his speech earlier, and he is correct to suggest that the work being taken forward by the Healthcare Improvement Scotland inspections and the task force are first steps. I also agree with Stephen Kerr that culture is at the centre of how any organisation operates. Mr Harvey asked specifically how government will ensure a national review, not simply of the design and delivery of services, but of the wider issues which have been raised. I listened very carefully to the points he mentioned, important issues like culture, staffing and the need to ensure that the scoping of what would be part of a national review is designed by experts. So I can confirm to him and others on the record, as chair of the new task force, I will seek to define from the task force how an investigation can take place. My view is that the findings of his inspections across all maternity units must form part of the task force consideration. For example, we know that these inspections will bring to light similar themes emerging across Scotland, so it would be right then for the task force to consider what specifically should be the focus of a national investigation. He, Mr Harvey and others have my assurance today that I will take this forward, and I will be happy to update Parliament on the specific work of the task force as it progresses. I'd also like to turn to neonatal intensive care units, and as the Cabinet Secretary's amendment makes clear, no neonatal units are closing. All local neonatal units in Scotland will continue to offer neonatal intensive care for their population. I've only got a minute left. The new model of neonatal intensive care was recommended by Best Start 2017 report. And it's clear through other contributions the impact that that will have on the babies. But if I may directly quote from Best Start, it said 3 to 5 neonatal intensive care units should be the immediate model for Scotland, progressing to 3 units within 5 years. As our amendment notes, the charity Bliss, the UK's leading charity that supports families with premature or sick babies, has reassured families that the model in Scotland is the safest and best possible model for sick babies. I think it's also important to recognise that as soon as those babies are well enough, they will be repatriated to their local neonatal unit. I know there is no place for complacency in the care of women and babies in our maternity service. The Scottish Government is committed to timely and continuous improvement. We will hold boards to account to ensure that every woman, baby and family across Scotland receives the high-quality care they deserve.
Thank you, Minister. I now call on Cara Mochan to close on behalf of Scottish Labour. Up to 8 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would like to begin by offering my deepest condolences to all those affected by what we have heard here today. Can I commend the families, those who have bravely shared their stories and spoken out about their experiences, and can I thank them for coming to the gallery and sitting with us today, and also to those that I know are at home watching. I understand that speaking about this would not have been easy, and I would like to offer my personal thanks to you all for telling your stories. We have heard your call for a national investigation, and I hope that the government benches have also. Jackie Baillie and Willie Rennie both have shown how this is not an either-or situation. The Cabinet Secretary can support our motion, and I hope that I can ask the Minister if she could come back to me on an intervention. Your motion suggests if is your position. Is your position that we will have an investigation, or if? Do you wish to come in? I'm happy to take it.
So I've been clear in what I've just said, that we will work towards how we start through the task force looking at the investigation.
Carol Mochan, I would remind members of the requirement to speak through the chair at all times.
Yep. Thank you. I don't think that is clear, and I hope that Patrick Harvey has listened hard, because we really thought deeply about what we were asking for. And we understand there has been a task force, but it hasn't been implemented. We understand the task force is going to be, with the Minister at the head. So how can we be sure? I will take the intervention from Patrick Harvey.
Patrick Harvey.
I'm grateful. And once again, I do welcome and pay tribute to Labour for bringing this motion, for bringing the argument for a national investigation. But I think what we have heard in the closing speech was a clear statement that this is now only a matter of framing it, of how it will be taken forward, not whether it will be taken forward.
Let's hear one another.
It does, I think, feel inappropriate if Parliament as a whole is not willing to take yes for an answer.
Carol Mockin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I hope that Patrick Harvie will vote for our motion, which is absolutely clear about what the Parliament are looking to deliver today. Presiding Officer, any loss or harm in maternity and neonatal services is tragic, especially when deaths could have been prevented. As others have said, these incidents are rare and the majority of women have safe and good experience when giving birth, but that does not diminish the experience of those who have not. Of course.
Paul Sweeney.
I thank my friend for giving way. We met earlier with my constituents, the Keegan family who lost their baby Mason at just 3 days old to sepsis that was entirely avoidable, and the Serious Adverse Events Review in NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde outlined the recommendations that need implemented, but the family do not have confidence that they have been implemented. We don't need to wait for a task force to tell us what we already know. It's the Minister's job to ensure that is done. Does she agree that the Minister should be getting on and doing that now?
Carol Mockin.
I thank the member for the intervention, and I fully agree. And I think he will agree with me that we must have a culture of transparency and not secrecy, and that does come from the top. And to agree our motion would show clear leadership from the top of this Scottish Government. This, if it can be short.
Sanders Gulhani.
Thank you. I have the Best Start report here, and I quote from section 6.4. Proposed levels of neonatal care in Scotland. It is proposed that the current total number of 15 neonatal units is retained, with 3 to 5 units being reprofiled as neonatal intensive care units. So I ask why the minimum 3 was chosen and not 5, and does Carol Mockin agree this is unacceptable?
Let's hear one another. Carol Mockin.
Thank you. Scottish Labour have been clear on this point. Absolutely. I know many across the chamber were shocked to read the findings of last week's Healthcare Improvement Scotland report, and many contributions, of course, concentrated in this. It revealed major concerns around culture, oversight of patient safety and staff well-being. Staff reported feelings of frustration, burnout and being ignored. The culture of mistrust that has developed should never be allowed in our NHS. Staff should feel supported, appreciated and listened to, and they should never, ever feel as though they cannot escalate concerns. The duty of candour must be real. It must be real, and the government must show leadership in this area. We have heard of the challenges of maternity services, and in the interest of time I'm not going to go over, but in my own South Scotland patch, challenges in the Wigtonshire area are beyond what women should have to accept. The Galloway Community Hospital Action Group, some of who are listening to the debate today, have fought a powerful campaign against the closure of the maternity unit in Stranraer. And that closure means that they have to travel 70 miles to Dumfries. And I have heard from a constituent today that the road was flooded and that road was closed today. So that gives extra strain and stress to mothers and families in that area. The Patient Safety Commissioner met the group only a couple of months ago and felt there was a gap in service. This is not a 21st century care. This is not how 21st century care for midwifery should look like. The Scottish Government have failed to provide adequate oversight in this decision in Wigtonshire, and they must look at how they interact with the Integrated Joint Board and listen to the community. Much of what has happened here is due to the Scottish Government's inability to effectively workforce plan, and it has left mothers and babies in Stranraer without a maternity unit. Before I close today's debate, I would like to take a moment to reflect on some of the calls from the Royal College of Midwives. In response to the Healthcare Improvement Scotland report, the RCM warned that staff shortages, rising workloads and a lack of specialist and educator roles in maternity services are placing unsustainable pressure on staff and risking long-term quality of care. Now, as other members have said, my colleague Michael Mara, the RCM have been urging for the changes from this Scottish Government For years, they have been raising this with you. Systematic challenges are letting women down, their families and the maternity staff. Many midwives feel as though they are at breaking point, and the union is strongly urging the government to invest in its maternity staff. The task force recommendations need to be implemented and some investment put behind that, and I would urge the Scottish Government to listen to that. Now, our calls are clear. For the staff, improvements to workforce planning are needed desperately to ensure the maternity wards are sufficiently staffed. We need investment in leadership and mentorship within midwifery. Yes, many of the solutions are already in the Nursing and Midwifery Task Force, and we do support the Midwifery Task Force. We want it to be delivered, but it does not need to be alone. For the mothers, babies and their families, a national investigation into the design and delivery of maternity and neonatal services across Scotland is required. It is clear members in this Parliament tonight must vote for the Scottish Labour motion if we are to protect mothers, babies and families in Scotland today. Presiding Officer, again, I give my deepest condolences and gratitude to those who have shared their stories and experiences. Without you, change cannot happen. We want change to happen. It is now over to the Scottish Government. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on Scotland's maternity services. It's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is Stage 3 proceedings for the Land Reform Scotland Bill. And in dealing with the amendments, members should have the bill as amended at Stage 2. That is Scottish Parliament Bill 44A, the second marshalled list and the second groupings of amendments. The division bell will sound and proceedings will be suspended for around 5 minutes for the first division of the Stage 3. The period of voting for the first division will be 30 seconds, and thereafter I will allow a voting period of 1 minute for the first division after a debate. Members who wish to speak in the debate on any group of amendments should press the request to speak buttons or enter RTS in the chat as soon as possible after the group has been called. And members should now refer to the marshalled list of amendments. Thank you, colleagues. I call amendments 350, 351, 352, 353, 354 and 355, all in the name of Douglas Lumsden and all previously debated with Amendment 349. And I invite Douglas Lumsden to move amendments 350 to 355 en bloc. Thank you. Does any member object to a single question being put on amendments 350 to 355? No member objects. Therefore, the question is that amendments 350 to 355 are agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. I call amendment 299 in the name of the Cabinet. My apologies. 229 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary. Already debated with amendment 349, Cabinet Secretary, to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that amendment 229 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. there will be a division. And as this is the first division of the stage, today, I suspend for around 5 minutes to allow members to access the digital voting system.